This is obviously a very important day, as is every other day, but thank you for coming on today. We're going to be talking about the initiative that you and Thomas Massie were championing in Congress.
Championing. We're not giving up.
And still are championing that had a very unique moment yesterday.
So Thomas Massie and I passed a bill. I mean, I could go through how Herculean it was. We had to overcome Trump. We had to overcome Johnson. We had to overcome skepticism in both of our parties. We had to overcome the billionaires who didn't want this coming out. But we persevered.
The New York Times editorial board that was like, hey, let's not do this, actually.
Yeah, I mean,
so many outlets in mainstream media, so many editorial boards in major legacy publishers were just like, hey, now, let's not release this stuff, actually.
You know, they called me, they kept, all these journalists who kind of like my economic policy and me, think of me as a serious person, said I'm a conspiracy theorist because I was leading this. And they'd say, oh, how's your friend, the vice president? He and you are both conspiracy theorists. I don't know what happened to the vice president because he was the one who was out there saying we should release these files. Suddenly he's gone quiet. Anyway, Massie and I, we overcame all the establishment opposition. We forced a vote. We got 70 Republicans to break with Donald Trump and say they were going to vote for us. We flipped Donald Trump. He ended up endorsing our bill and caving to the Congress. We got 100 senators. Schumer had to introduce my bill in the Senate for unanimous consent a week after I'd called on him to step down from the Senate. So we got the whole process working. President signs the bill, and this means they've got to finally release the files. Then we see yesterday, they don't release 90% of what they're supposed to release.
And what's interesting is, from what I understand, you were aware that this could potentially happen, right? So there was language in the act that Donald Trump signed into law that specifically detailed certain things that the Department of Justice could do, including if there were any sort of significant redactions, they had to walk through exactly why they were redacting. And from what we understand now, there were over 200 Department of Justice lawyers that went through and engaged in significant redactions. The BBC's estimation was that apparently 90% of the files were redacted, somewhere along those lines. Hold on. Kaya.
She's hungry?
She's hungry for love, but she'll get a lot of fur on you. So I'm going to, Kaya, place. But as I was saying, Donald Trump's former defense attorney, now Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, actually released a memo as well to Congress, Republican congressperson, from what I understand, saying that politically active or politically involved persons were also redacted.
Yeah,
similar to the 1,200 plus victims, and
that's outrageous. I mean, look, they are redacting information to basically protect people who are in the government or in politics or in business. And if you look at the law, we explicitly say you can't redact things to protect people's reputation or if it's going to cause embarrassment. They're doing exactly the opposite of what the law says. And then, the two documents we wanted out. One was a 60-count indictment of Jeffrey Epstein because the 60-count indictment never saw the light of day. And it was ultimately 2 counts he was charged on. But there were 60 counts. Now, why do we want that document? Because that document will talk about how he made all his illegal money. How did this guy $500 million? Who was paying him? Who were the other men involved with him? They didn't release that. They didn't release the prosecution memo justifying that indictment, the draft indictment. All of those draft indictments and prosecution memo got buried. And in our law, which you got up there, we say specifically all internal DOJ communications, including memos, notes, decisions to charge or not to charge, investigate or decline to investigate. Specifically, that language was for getting these 2 documents, and they're basically disobeying the law. And by the way, this isn't even, what's so scary to me is it's not just concealing Trump's name. I expected that they would try to eliminate the Trump name. They're protecting something else here. They're protecting rich and powerful interests going well beyond Donald Trump. That's what has me the most concerned. Like, what is it that they're trying to protect, and why are they trying to protect it?
Yes. So there's obviously the thing that a lot of people are hyper invested in here, which is, of course, the worst crime. But then beyond that, there's obviously a lot of paper trail and a lot of financial crimes that took place as well, and a lot of very connected, very wealthy individuals that were Jeffrey Epstein associates, and we simply want to figure out like what level of involvement did they have. Not every single person, I suspect, that was pictured around Jeffrey Epstein was engaging in the worst of all crimes. That's not my assessment of this at all. I do fear that just as you said, that is precisely what they're trying to protect here. That's precisely what they're trying to hide. Now, I have a bunch of questions. Why do you think that they actually sheltered the public from the initial plea bargain deal, for example, like the other details that came out about how the first time Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and prosecuted, there was this trial that took place, and Trump's former labor secretary, Alexander Acosta, was the prosecutor on the case, who offered him a sweetheart plea bargain where he was allowed to be released on work release while he was in prison. That's insane.
He abused people while he was released. I mean, that's how horrific this was.
So that was one of the major things that I was invested in, that I wanted to find out about. Why do you think they're openly hiding this side of the Jeffrey Epstein profile?
Well, because they know there was a huge amount of wrongdoing. That's one of the reasons we wanted that initial indictment draft, because there were supposed to be 60 counts. All those 60 counts would be exposed. Acosta prosecuted 2 counts.
Yeah.
He got rid of all the 58. Then he does the plea bargain deal. We wanted to see the memos. What went into the decision to say that reasonable? And I'm sure there are dissenting opinions of people who said absolutely not. We wanted to see that email correspondence, those memos. They're hiding this because they know that they're rich and powerful people who intervened. Yeah. And they know justice was not done, not just because of Epstein, not just because of Maxine
Ghislaine Maxwell.
Ghislaine Maxwell. You'd think I know it by now. Ghislaine Maxwell. I always get the name messed up. Ghislaine Maxwell. But it was done because of rich and powerful men.
Absolutely. So there's the financial elite that's obviously very connected to Jeffrey Epstein in ways that we already know in broad daylight, constantly in and out of like these meetings, constantly photographed with him, some of which the House Oversight Committee has actually released, like the Democratic Oversight Committee has released as well, partially from, I believe, the Epstein, what is it called? Not the manor, but like the data dumps that came, the photographic dumps that came are not just from the investigation, right? Like the estate, the Epstein estate.
They're two different things.
Yeah. So can you describe that?
There's the law that requires the Justice Department to release them.
Yeah.
And then there's the letter that I sent to the estate saying we got to release that information. And Comer, who's the Republican chair, subpoenaed him because of Summer Lee's work and Robert Garcia's work, and they are releasing information. So there are two places we're getting this information from.
Yeah. And so a lot of the photos that were coming out from the Oversight Committee were coming from the estate, from if I recall correctly, and yet some of those files that would definitely be in the investigation in the Jeffrey Epstein files, right, from the court proceedings are redacted. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this invited a lot of scrutiny, a lot of suspicion that the Department of Justice had actively redacted Donald Trump and many other high-profile players in American politics from the initial file release. One of the things that they ended up doing, and I suspected that initially they would most likely just offer a little bit of red meat to the base and say like, oh, look, see Bill Clinton.
Right.
And they did do that. And I also suspected that they would be so incompetent, as they have been over and over again, that they would still somehow find a way to fuck it up, which they did. And the oversight Dems actually called this out. Yesterday, we found out, alongside the rest of the internet, when the files were being released, there was one photo that actually made it through the censors, and one photo of Trump that made it through the censors. But it was a photo that was in a drawer, so I guess like
they didn't notice
whatever.
it.
Yeah, they did not notice that Donald Trump was in some of the files. What the Department of Justice, from what we understand now, did was when they realized that Donald Trump was in this photo, they just deleted it.
Well, the cover-up is always worse than the crime. Someone probably thought, oh, am I going to get in trouble with Trump or the Trump White House? And it's absurd. I mean, look, this is the issue that is unraveling in part his presidency. This is the only issue where the MAGA base is brazenly defying him. Why?
Yeah.
Because he said that he was going to expose these people. He said that he was going to expose these corrupt people who get one set of justice, and he's going to bring justice. He's not a perfect person. No one thinks that Donald Trump has led a perfect life, but they thought he was actually going to expose these folks and return government to people. And he's betrayed that promise. And that's why you look at my X feed. I encourage folks to just go and look at the X feed. I've got more MAGA supporters standing up for me than I ever have in my entire political career.
Yeah.
They're staking my side over Pam Bondi's side. They're going after the DOJ, saying you're killing Donald Trump's presidency. And so this issue, everyone says we got to take the fight to Trump, take the fight to Trump. They all do memes against it, call him a fascist, call him a dictator. No one has actually been able to break the MAGA coalition. The reason Massey and I have actually been able to break the MAGA coalition is because we're actually saying we're on the people's side instead of the system side, that the system is rotten. That's what you got to do as a first principle for the Democratic Party. The system is rotten. Too much big money, too much influence of wealthy people, too many people who are getting away with things, and that we're going to be on the side of the people against this rotten system. And that was what Trump was saying, but he hasn't delivered.
I think this is, from my analysis, it almost feels like this is one of the purest expressions of like class politics that Americans can get on board with. It's not dialectics, it's not materialist at all, but it is like something that they have seen or something that they've suspected. There's obviously a lot of conspiracy around this sort of stuff, but now what I am seeing is that there are some people who see that this is valid as opposed to the previous formations of these sorts of conspiracy theories. There is evidence on this. They were pretty blatant about.
They controlled the law enforcement. They thought if the FBI is not even investigating it, what do they have to worry about?
Exactly.
I mean, there are documents saying, I have a woman for you. I have a girl for you, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just sickening stuff. And 1,200 victims. For anyone who says, there's not other rich and powerful people who are involved, I said, one person is not abusing 1,200 people. Just the math doesn't work up. There are other people who are on that island. And, the reason this is, I think, resonant is people feel an anger that they've lost their economic voice. They don't control their own political voice. There's something that's wrong with the system. And this is like the symbol of what's wrong.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a perfect demonstration of like how the super wealthy get away with doing heinous crimes while simultaneously controlling the levers of power, right? And I think that's the reason why a lot of people, this is a bipartisan thing, and not bipartisan in the sense that like politicians are on board with it, but this is a bipartisan issue in the eyes of the public. And as you also suggested, as you also correctly pointed out, I believe it's Donald Trump's least popular issue with his base, 54% disapproval, as opposed to everything else where the MAGA base basically is 80% approval rating on anything that Donald Trump is doing, with the exception of this, where there's a 54% disapproval. So it's pretty significant. One of the angles that I wanted to cover here, however, that I feel like the media is noticeably absent on, or omitting, is the potential connection with not just the super wealthy, but like intelligence. I know I'm sure you've seen the drop site reporting on this stuff, because there was Jeffrey Epstein's JE Vacation email address was leaked, was hacked, and his entire correspondence with world leaders and everyone else was leaked for all to see. And there has been very little coverage on this from, the legacy publishers, unfortunately. And the only time I ever hear about this connection between Jeffrey Epstein and potentially Israeli intelligence, even though he is very clearly connected to Ehud Barak, and we knew about this even before the emails as well, and numerous other, high-profile world leaders, it's to say, this suggestion is so ridiculous. And I believe Thomas Massey also brought this up yesterday, where he said a big part of the reason why there is this major cover-up is because it is very likely that Jeffrey Epstein was connected in some way, shape, or form to our intelligence and also to Israeli intelligence as well. Do you have any opinions on that?
Well, my opinion is that that's why we need the release of the files. That's why this was drafted in a way that would get the FBI files, that would get the national security files. That's why the lawyers of the survivors say you need all the files, the financial files, the national security files, the FBI files, and anything that isn't a current current national security issues. So we even drafted it saying you can't overclassify information. If there's not a significant, clear national security threat, then it has to be declassified. So this will put to rest the issue is if we could have transparency, if the American people can see the files.
Yeah.
And if they can't see the files, then conspiracies will continue to grow, whether true or not. And so I guess even the legacy media should be just calling for the release of the files.
Yeah. And there is this somewhat elitist attitude, I feel like, that at least I've seen. I have tremendous respect for many journalists that I know and love that work at these outlets that want to do very good work and oftentimes do very good work. But overall, I feel like the editorial teams and the way that they respond to this kind of stuff is to simply say, oh, the public doesn't know how to handle this information. And I think that's a dangerous line of thinking in general. The idea that people are too stupid to understand what's going on. But I do think that invites additional scrutiny, and that actually invites a lot of conspiracy theories if the truth is not assessed by credible actors and investigative reporters. So I always appreciate what Dropsite is doing in terms of doing that investigation, that investigative reporting, and that work. There are connections between Jeffrey Epstein and obviously Ehud Barak. There's connections between Jeffrey Epstein and people that were possibly involved in Iran-Contra that just recently came out. And I guess one of the questions I have for you is there was another statement that Thomas Massie made that he said 20 to 25 people, if they are not outed as being co-conspirators or as being engaged with Jeffrey Epstein in some way, shape, or form, by the time Friday comes around, that means that there will have been heavy redaction in direct violation of the act that was passed.
Correct.
Have you guys actually seen the unredacted files?
We have not. We've requested to see them. In fact, one of the things that Thomas and I were discussing today is putting together a committee of Congress, me, him, maybe someone from the Judiciary Committee, to go and look at these files, even if it's in a classified setting, to be able to say what complies and what doesn't comply. Because right now, they have shown no good faith in complying. And the reality is we know that the survivors' lawyers have seen the files. And they have told us, and the survivors have told us, that there are other powerful men. Now, my view is every person, man, there is guilty if they didn't say something in terms of abetting abuse. And that's the type of information that we're going to get if we get that 60-count indictment, if we get the 82-page memo that the prosecutions wrote, and if we get the FD forms, the FBI forms of interviews of all of the men who were interviewed by the FBI to understand what happened. I mean, how do you have a situation of a release where no one else's names are in there being investigated? Obviously, if there are 1,200 victims, even if the FBI concluded that some of these people were innocent or not guilty, they would have interviewed them. They would have been witnesses. There would have been questions. Where is all that stuff?
What are the next steps here?
Well, there are a few steps. First of all, obviously, impeachment is on the table for Pam Bondi. There is criminal prosecution that she could face, or others at the Justice Department could face. And by the way, that criminal prosecution risk runs well beyond this administration. The next administration, in my view, it can't just be kumbaya. There needs to be accountability for crimes committed, accountability for crimes committed with ICE, accountability for crimes committed in the Caribbean where innocent boatmen are being killed, and accountability for crimes committed in not complying with Massie and my Epstein Transparency Act. Accountability is going to be needed. But Massie and I are also in the process of drafting a bill for the inherent contempt of Congress. What does that mean? Pam Bondi could be fined every day if she's not agreeing to release these documents. And we're going to propose a group of people in Congress, a bipartisan group that gets to review these documents so that we can assess what is a legitimate redaction and what is not, and actually have her comply with the law. Because my goal is not retribution. It's not to score a point against the president's cabinet. My goal is justice for these survivors and actually figuring out how we get these documents out. One point, I think this first run may have been a test, them just seeing, okay, what can we get away with? And the outcry that it's come out, hopefully this pushes them to realize this, that they're not done with this. Just the before Christmas release isn't working.
Yeah.
That there's going to be more demand for these documents to actually come out.
Yeah. So that's one angle for sure. And I think that there is a lot of appetite across the board, across the political spectrum for some kind of transparency in all of this. Clearly, if that wasn't the case, then Donald Trump wouldn't have signed this act into law to begin with, right? And they have mishandled this process absolutely. I guess what are the next steps? Not to throw curveballs here, but like, what are the next steps if like Donald Trump offers a blanket pardon across the board to everyone that's mishandling this or deliberately redacting things in violation of the law?
Well, he could do that, and it would make it harder for them to be prosecuted in the future. But, I mean, do you really want to be a career Justice Department official or even appointee having as the capstone on your career being pardoned by Donald Trump for protecting files? I mean, that's really what people will be choosing. And then it'll be the next administration that releases all of this. We are not giving up because the reason I believe it's possible to shift the administration is we shifted from calling it a hoax to signing the bill, because the one thing he can read is public opinion.
Yeah.
And he saw that this was going to be a huge story. It was hurting his presidency. In fact, he kept saying, I don't know why we keep talking about Epstein. I want to talk about all my achievements. He knew it was the Achilles heel, the kryptonite of his administration. And so now he's going to realize that this was another whiff by Pam Bondi. Susan Wild said it. She keeps whiffing. I don't know. She's so out of touch. She was supposed to meet the survivors. And then she said, I've got an appointment. I can't meet the survivors.
Yeah. There was one thing that I also wanted to bring up with Pam Bondi's inconsistency in the way that she's actually talked about this, because obviously initially when they got together and did this like fake release of the Epstein files with all of the MAGA influencers,
right.
And that was a major W. Like they thought that this would satiate people's appetite for the truth.
Right.
And very clearly, it was all the stuff that we had access to already. And I think they thought that the people would just not demand more, where they were like, oh yeah, we're tuned in. We saw this, libs of TikTok was celebrating that they got this tranche of data.
Yeah.
But in the process, there were certain things that Pam Bondi had said that we now know are absolutely untrue. And the notion that this was the notion that this was just Jeffrey Epstein's doing, that he was just simply procuring all of this stuff for himself, is very clearly untrue. So that inconsistency, does that reach the boundaries of perjury? I mean, or does that only happen if Pam Bondi is in front of Congress, I guess?
The biggest thing is she's obstructed justice. She can be impeached because she didn't comply with the law. I mean, that's the obstruction of justice, and that's grounds for impeachment, is grounds for criminal prosecution. She also lied, right? I mean, she stood up in front of the country and said, there's nothing more to see. We've released everything.
Yeah.
And by their own admission, they're releasing hundreds of thousands of more documents. What changed?
Yeah.
Well, how did they suddenly find all these documents? By the way, there are 300 gigabytes of files on the Epstein files. How do I know this? Because Kash Patel in front of Congress said they're 300 gigabytes, and they've released yesterday 2.5 gigabytes. So you can do the math. I mean, they've got hundreds of thousands more documents. And what are these documents? All the interviews. They're 1,200 survivors, all the interviews that they were conducted, all the other men who were on the island, all the other men who participated in this. I mean, we don't want just random documents. We don't want just random files. We don't want just random photos. We want to know who was on that island. All that information is in those FBI witness interview FD files.
Yeah. Also, what level of involvement did Steve Bannon have, for example, another Trump affiliate that we know was deeply connected to Jeffrey Epstein? And there's a lot of inconsistency in the way that he's also presented himself here. At first, after Julie K. Brown's investigative reporting at the Miami Herald,
she's terrific.
She's amazing. When the second Epstein trial was starting, Bannon actually went to Jeffrey Epstein and conducted these interviews in the form of deposition training and to do PR. And then when the attitude shifted against Jeffrey Epstein even more than it had, he very quickly turned around and said, "Oh, I'm just shooting a documentary," right? But there are so many photos of Steve Bannon being chummy with Jeffrey Epstein. Why is none of that in the investigation? Why was that redacted? I mean, this is not even Donald Trump at that point. This is a totally, supposedly unaffiliated person. So, like, why is the Department of Justice not only sheltering Donald Trump, but sheltering Trump allies who are political operatives themselves? I mean, that's not a matter of national security, right?
No, they're sheltering rich and powerful people.
Yeah.
Just like they're sheltering the survivors. I mean, the whole point of the Epstein Act was that we want to know who these rich and powerful people were.
Yeah.
That they weren't charged. Usually the Justice Department doesn't release things on people who weren't charged because they figure, well, your reputation shouldn't be destroyed if you weren't charged. But in this case, we know that the process was corrupt. We know that the law enforcement couldn't be trusted.
Yeah.
We know that they didn't follow the FBI tips, that we know that they didn't prosecute. So in this case, the American public is saying we do want everything out there because the justice system let these women down.
Yeah, justice delayed is justice denied, and the justice has been delayed. And the further they, the further that the Department of Justice tries to engage in this cover up, they're only expanding on the injustice that they participated in early on. So, what do you? This is actually a good question. What would you think is like a solid example of a legitimate national security hypothetical for you? What would be a real example of a national security concern that they engage in some sort of redaction on?
If there was actually some conversation where it would expose someone who is a spy or a CIA agent and expose who they are and their identity or expose their family, you don't want to put people at risk who are in those roles. If Epstein happened to know something because he knew a lot of powerful people about our national secrets in terms of our sensitive weapons or sensitive information, you wouldn't want that out there. So I can see there being, or if there were some comments made about a foreign leader, that you don't want the American president to be exposed in that way, or another country thinking something. So there are cases, and we can debate what those cases are. People often say, why did you not write the bill in a way that said everything has to come out and not even have an exception for classified information? And anyone who's been in Congress more than a day will tell you there's no chance anything like that would pass. There are too many people in Congress who'd just find that as the excuse. Khanna and Massey want to get rid of classified information. So we'd had the narrowest possible classified drafting to be able to get that bill through.
Okay. So that, for the record, that in and of itself, though, I think does lend even further credence to the suspicion that there was some kind of involvement with the intelligence communities, which is one of the prevailing narratives that is often left unaddressed, like I said, with the exception of mainstream outlets just simply calling this a conspiracy theory. But obviously it goes beyond that as well. There are people who are not, CIA affiliated that are being sheltered here very clearly. There's also Donald Trump being sheltered here with the redactions, as we have seen from the actions that the Justice took after people realized that they failed to redact some of the Donald Trump photos. And this is this is so silly, right? So it's things like this. It's things like this that people understandably want answers for. Do you feel like omitting this kind of stuff or refusing to talk about this kind of stuff is adding on to the scrutiny that people have for mainstream media nowadays?
Yeah, I think it all should come out. And we've drafted, that's why the classified exception we drafted was the narrowest possible way, that you have to justify it. It can't be excessively used. It can't be used to cover up what actually took place. And we drafted it with the narrowest way, in a way that could still pass the Congress. Because the reality is, if the bill doesn't pass the Congress, there's no use to it. But that is why what we're saying is that there needs to be people like Massey and me who get to see these documents, and then we can have a yes or no vote on, is it truly something redacted because it's going to protect the survivors or families or protect certain classified information, or should this be out there? My view is, if you don't have this out there, that's how you, as you pointed out, have conspiracy theories take hold. I mean, if there's nothing to hide, put it out there. Let people make that determination. By the way, the biggest thing that could be out there is the indictment, the 60-page indictment.
Yeah.
So people know, okay, was there foreign involvement? I mean, that indictment will say that right there. If there was no evidence in that indictment foreign interest, that would be a big tell that, okay, maybe there wasn't there. If the indictment says, look, here are the 60 counts and here are the things that were happening from overseas, that would be a big issue. That's why we explicitly
Wait,
drafted.
this is the indictment for the second investigation or the first one?
This is the 60-page indictment, 60-count indictment that the assistant U.S. attorney in Florida put together in 2007.
Oh,
That Acosta ignored and then charges just 2 counts. Those are 60 counts. We want to see all of that. And that will get to the questions that you've been asking.
So that the other side of the story also is Alexander Acosta is out there, like he is out there. Is there any demand to maybe pull him in front of Congress? Is that something that you guys can entertain? Because like he was the labor secretary at the time.
He came before the oversight committee, but it's just not, I don't think we can believe him. I mean,
so because there is the famous secondhand there was some reporting in the media at the time that when he was labor secretary and he resigned because of the Epstein stuff, there was this question where he was like, oh, well, at the time, someone led me to believe that he was actually intelligent, someone from higher up, because there was also a subsequent federal investigation that was taking place. And there were a lot of co-conspirators that actually were sheltered from the law in what seemingly was even beyond the sweetheart plea bargain that we've seen. Like there's no instance where there's this virtual RICO case almost where you can where you find so many people who are criminally liable, where all of the other people that were engaging in these acts are not only given blanket protection, blanket immunity, but we don't even know who they are as unindicted co-conspirators at all. Like it's unimaginable. It's unheard of.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I'm seeing some of the questions. It's a great thing. You get instantaneous feedback. One, why is there no enforcement mechanism? There is. The enforcement mechanism is the obstruction of justice. You don't have to put in. This is one of the big misconceptions out there. Anyone who doesn't who violates a congressional law by definition is obstructing justice, where Congress has asked it for justice purposes and can be decades in prison for that. So the question is not, is there an enforcement mechanism? It's, are we going to actually have it enforced? And if it's not going to be enforced by this administration, it needs to be enforced by the next one. Mm-hmm. The second point is that Acosta should be prosecuted if if there's clear evidence of perjury. I mean, you can't come in and lie to Congress.
Well, now he has a cushy job at Newsmax, because I've been following his career. It's very interesting, going from Florida prosecutor, upstart, to like labor secretary under Donald Trump, to then resigning in disgrace, or at least like trying to quietly exit the Trump administration when the Epstein stuff was coming back to the forefront, only to now sit on the board, I believe, of Newsmax. That's what he's doing now.
And look, there's got to be an accountability of what did he know. But the reason it's so hard to prosecute all these individuals and hold them accountable is we don't have the files.
Yeah.
There's got to be the evidence of what came out, and then we can say, okay, now we know that someone was lying or not lying.
Kash Patel. Didn't Patel say that there were no other individuals that could be charged in front of Congress? There is also...
How does he know that? I mean, the survivors don't believe that.
They themselves, according to Thomas Massey, who has spoken to the lawyers of many of the survivors, say that there is at least 20 to 25 people that are supposed to be in the first tranche of data that came out, that was supposed to come out yesterday, were supposed to be outed.
That was the whole point of the release, and not a single person. We don't have any single information about someone who was engaged in the abuse or cover up of the abuse beyond Maxwell and Epstein, and that's why this thing is a farce, and that's why Massey and I are upping the ante, saying we will use all our powers, whether it's inherent contempt, whether it is impeachment, whether it's referral for prosecution. The reality is that Massey and I have been effective on this issue because we have cracked the MAGA coalition, because it's bipartisan, because we're taking on a corrupt system. And by the way, this is a corrupt system that has led to billionaires accumulating value. We need to have a billionaire tax in this country, a wealth tax. It's led to overseas wars. We shouldn't be bombing people, innocent people on boats in the Caribbean. It led this kind of corrupt system to the Iraq War, which was wrong. It led to us at 20 years in Afghanistan. It led to the overthrow of Libya, which was a total foreign policy blunder. It led to supporting of Netanyahu and the genocide which the Israeli government committed in Gaza, and a blank check. And I was one of the few politicians who stood up and said no to the $14 billion, and who has gotten on Delia Ramirez's bill to say block military sales to Netanyahu's government, and who's gotten on Rashida Tlaib's resolution to say what the Israeli government did was a genocide. But the point of all of this is, if we are not going to have politicians willing to tell the truth when it comes to things like Epstein, how do you expect them to tell the truth about issues of foreign policy? How do you expect them to tell the truth about issues of economic policy? The currency of modern politics should be courage and truth-telling, not just charisma and memes. Are you going to stand for principle in this country?
Yeah.